Game development seems like pure creativity, turning dreams into playable worlds. But behind the scenes, there's a hidden truth. Many game projects get abandoned. It happens to big studios and small indie teams for all sorts of reasons. Money problems, creative disagreements, projects getting too big, or just developer burnout when things aren't working. These abandoned games aren't just footnotes, they are stories of real people, their hopes, their hard work, and sometimes their disappointments. Every dropped game has a story of what could have been. It's never an easy decision to quit. Developers pour everything into these games, working crazy hours and pushing themselves. But sometimes they hit walls they can't break through, or the game idea just doesn't match reality anymore. They have to make the tough choice to stop. This happens all the time in gaming, and each time it teaches us something about the challenges developers face. In this video, we'll go through 5 instances of game developers who pretty much gave up on their projects. We'll look at why they made that decision and what we can learn from these instances. Imagine a world choked by social disparity, where the elite reside in a gleaming floating metropolis, the AirCitadel, while the downtrodden toil below. In this bleak yet beautiful dystopian setting, Adrian Novell envisioned Skyrider and the Journey to the AirCitadel, a unique cooperative action puzzle platformer designed for 2 players. The game centered around Noki, a resourceful protagonist, and his agile drone companion Roboto. Players were meant to embody both characters, seamlessly switching between them to solve intricate environmental puzzles, engage in strategic combat, and ascend towards the AirCitadel, a potential symbol of the establishment's oppressive power. Skyrider was more than just a game for Adrian and his small, dedicated team. It was a labor of love, a passion project poured into countless after-hours sessions over 4 arduous years. They meticulously crafted a world rich in atmosphere and imbued with a subtle critique of societal imbalances. The gameplay was designed to foster genuine cooperation, requiring players to communicate and strategize. However, beneath the surface of this creative endeavor, the harsh realities of indie game development began to creep in. The team faced a persistent uphill battle against financial constraints. Securing adequate funding proved to be an insurmountable challenge, and despite relentless efforts, they were unable to find a publisher willing to invest in their vision. Hope flickered briefly in 2016 with the announcement of the Nintendo Switch, a console that seemed perfectly suited to Skyrider's cooperative gameplay and unique charm. The team rallied, adapting their project to the new platform and pitching it with renewed vigor. Yet sadly, this attempt too ultimately fell short. The decisive blow came when anticipated funding, which had been dangled as a lifeline, unexpectedly evaporated. The financial foundations crumbled and the stark truth became undeniable. Skyrider and the Journey to the AirCitadel was no longer viable. In July 2016, development ground to a halt. The cancellation sent shockwaves through the small team, leaving behind not just professional disappointment, but a deep personal void. The shared dream, the countless hours of dedication, the emotional investment, all seemed to dissipate into thin air. In the aftermath, a heavy silence descended. For 7 long months, the team members, each grappling with their own form of grief, lost contact. The vibrant floating AirCitadel of their creation, intended to be a stage for cooperative triumph and commentary on social injustice, was instead left as a ghostly, unfinished monument to the precarious nature of indie game development, where even the most compelling visions can be tragically grounded by earthly limitations. Duke Nukem Forever, just the name itself sends shivers down the spines of game developers and nostalgia pangs through gamers who remember the late 90s. This wasn't just another game announcement back in April 1997 when 3D Realms dropped the bomb. It was supposed to be a seismic event, because this was supposed to be the direct sequel to the legendary Duke Nukem 3D. Hype levels were off the charts. Fans were salivating at the prospect of a new revolutionary shooter experience. But what unfolded wasn't a revolution. It was more like a slow-motion train wreck, a cautionary tale etched in digital code. The journey of Duke Nukem Forever, from the initial burst of excitement to its eventual, almost mythical release, became an epic saga of development hell, a true test of industry patience and, frankly, developer sanity. The first sign of trouble: think musical chairs but with game engines. Development started on the Quake 2 engine, which is solid, right? Nope, switched to Unreal Engine in '98. Still okay? Wrong again. Then came multiple iterations of the Unreal Engine. Imagine rebuilding your house not just once or twice, but constantly tearing down walls and changing the blueprints every frickin' year. That's essentially what happened with Duke Nukem Forever. Each engine swap was like a massive demolition project, forcing 3D Realms to scrap and rebuild huge chunks of the game. This constant technological flux, coupled with what seemed like a constantly shifting vision for the game itself, meant that they could never nail down a solid development plan. It was like trying to nail jelly to a wall, constantly slipping, constantly changing shape. And it wasn't just the tech that was in chaos. Developer turnover became another major anchor, dragging the project down. 3D Realms saw a revolving door of talent come and go over the years. Each new developer, while skilled, brought their own ideas to the table, often clashing with previous directions and leaving behind bits and pieces of unfinished work that didn't quite fit with the new vision. It became the sprawling patchwork quilt of partially completed levels, conflicting code, and design documents that were probably gathering dust faster than they were being read. Adding to the disarray was a lack of consistent leadership and a clear, unwavering roadmap. Without a steady hand at the helm and a clear destination, the project just stagnated. Years bled into decades, and still Duke Nukem Forever remained more of a legend than a playable game. By the late 2000s, 3D Realms co-founders George Broussard and Scott Miller were not just creatively invested, they were financially committed to the tune of their own money, desperately trying to keep the dream alive. But then the breaking point, the moment the dam finally burst, came in 2009. Financial pressure had been mounting for years, and when repeated pleas for more funding were met with a brick wall by publisher Take-Two Interactive, 3D Realms was backed into a corner with no escape. Cash flow dried up, and the unthinkable happened. With no funds to continue, 3D Realms had to make the devastating decision to lay off their entire staff. It was a brutal public execution of the project, seemingly ending 12 years of agonizing development. For fans, it felt like a death knell. Duke Nukem Forever wasn't just delayed, it was dead. The game that had become a symbol of endless promise was now a monument to unfulfilled potential. But hold on, because the story has a twist wilder than anything Midnight Shyamalan has ever made. Just when everyone had written it off like a phoenix from the ashes of development hell, Gearbox Software swooped in during 2010, led by Randy Pitchford, a name with a surprising connection to 3D Realms' past. It was like a last-minute Hollywood rescue. Gearbox, against all odds, managed to sift through the mountains of code and assets, salvage what they could, and somehow miraculously push through to the finish line. And in June of 2011, after an unprecedented and frankly unbelievable 14-year development cycle, Duke Nukem Forever finally saw the light of day. The release was a moment of bewildered triumph, but the game itself, well, it wasn't quite the earth-shattering return everyone had dreamed of. Reviews were mixed, often pointing out that after all that time, the game felt dated. It served as a stark reminder that even the most passionately anticipated projects, when trapped in developmental purgatory for too long, can struggle to live up to the impossible weight of expectation and the relentless march of time itself. For fans yearning to step back into the heart-pounding, acid-blooded universe of Alien, Alien's Fireteam Elite arrived in August 2021 with the roaring promise of pulse rifles and the terrifying shriek of xenomorphs. Developed by Code Iron Studios, this cooperative third-person shooter was designed to plunge players into the iconic lore, offering a chance to team up and face the relentless hordes in squad-based combat. Set 23 years after the original film trilogy, the game painted a familiar yet fresh canvas with the Alien timeline, immediately sparking excitement among franchise devotees eager for new interactive experiences within this beloved world. Players could customize their Space Marines, choose from varied classes, and delve into story-driven missions that hinted at deeper narratives lurking in the Xenoverse. The initial launch felt like a breath of fresh, albeit intensely stressful, air for Alien games. However, the initial surge for adrenaline and fan enthusiasm encountered turbulence shortly after deployment. Alien's Fireteam Elite, while capturing the essential atmosphere of the source material, found itself navigating a critical asteroid field. Reviews landed in mixed territory, while praise was rightly given for its intense cooperative gameplay and faithful recreation of the Alien universe's oppressive ambience. Critiques emerged concerning repetitive level designs and a campaign story that some felt lacked substantial depth beyond its initial setup. This somewhat lukewarm reception, coupled with frustrating technical hiccups like persistent matchmaking woes and the absence of cross-platform play, a feature increasingly expected in modern multiplayer titles, began to subtly erode the game's initial player base. The initial Fireteam enthusiasm started to dwindle. In an attempt to reignite the flames, a single significant content expansion, Pathogen, was released roughly a year later in August of 2022. This DLC offered a fresh injection of content, bringing new missions, weapons to combat the xenomorph threat, and even new enemy types to terrorize players. Pathogen was a welcome addition, yet in retrospect it proved to be a solitary beacon in what would become a rapidly darkening space. It just wasn't enough to sustainably recapture and retain a dwindling player base or foster a thriving long-term community around Fireteam Elite. The content pipeline, once hinting at future possibilities, abruptly seemed to run dry. No grand announcements of further expansions or substantial updates followed. By 2023, the writing on the wall became increasingly clear. Alien's Fireteam Elite, despite its initial promise and dedicated fanbase, had effectively seen its active development curtailed. Code Iron Studios shifted its focus to new horizons, most notably Project Macondo, a project whispered to be a sequel potentially aiming for a Q3 2025 release. While a sequel might eventually materialize, the abrupt halt in support for Fireteam Elite resonated deeply within its community. The game's narrative in the eyes of many players had concluded on an unsatisfying cliffhanger, unresolved plot threads dangling, and the tantalizing potential for further expansion left tragically unexplored. The absence of ongoing content combined with a deafening silence regarding any future support plans fostered a growing perception and perhaps a harsh reality that Alien's Fireteam Elite had been for all intents and purposes abandoned by its creators. This situation left a lingering sense of disappointment among both dedicated Alien franchise fans and players who genuinely enjoyed the game's core mechanics. Alien's Fireteam Elite, a title that once held the promise of becoming a true co-op shooter staple within the iconic universe, ultimately fell short of fully realizing its potential, becoming another chapter in the narrative of promising games left to fade into the digital void. Electronic Arts. Never one to shy away from dipping their corporate toes into lucrative genres, they decided to try and muscle in on Capcom's monster hunting turf with Wild Hearts. Under their EA Originals banner, the one that occasionally lets a bit of creativity slip through the cracks before inevitably circling back to profit maximization, they partnered with Koei Tecmo's Omega Force. The goal? Simple: to dethrone Monster Hunter. Unveiled in 2022 with much marketing fanfare and launched in February 2023, Wild Hearts dropped players into Azuma, a visually striking world drenched in feudal Japanese aesthetics. In this game, you are tasked with taking down colossal beasts called kimono, wielding a supposedly revolutionary crafting system known as karakuri. On paper, Wild Hearts looked like it might have something. This karakuri system, which allowed you to whip up all sorts of contraptions mid-battle for both combat and traversal, actually seemed genuinely inventive. It offered a fresh spin on the well-established monster hunting formula, potentially injecting a welcome dose of strategy and player-driven creativity. But, and you knew there was a but coming with EA involved, the game's launch was about as smooth as sandpaper, particularly for PC players, because who really cares about PC optimization when you focus on console sales, right EA? The game was a technical mess. Stuttering frame rate drops that would make your eyes bleed, and a whole laundry list of other technical gremlins turned the experience into a frustrating rather than exhilarating monster hunt. And the problems weren't just under the hood. Balance? Forget about it. The difficulty curve in Wild Hearts was less of a curve and more of a jagged, unpredictable mountain range. Some players breezed through sections feeling unchallenged, while others slammed headfirst into brick walls of difficulty, leading to an inconsistent and ultimately unsatisfying gameplay loop. Unsurprisingly, the critical reception was lukewarm at best. Sure, some outlets acknowledged the game's attempts at genre innovation, but the pervasive technical issues and balance quirks couldn't be ignored. Generally favorable on Metacritic? In EA's world of chasing massive hits, that's probably translated to underperforming, and we all know how EA reacts to that. Fast forward a measly few months after its release, and the writing was already scrawled in giant neon letters across the wall. EA was done. By September 2023, barely half a year after launch, whispers turned into shouts from community moderators and online forums. Support was being yanked. Poof. Gone. Reddit, X, Twitter 2.0, whatever you want to call that dumpster fire. Everywhere you looked, players were venting their disappointment and, frankly, their lack of surprise at EA's predictable behavior. No updates, no patches to fix the glaring technical issues, no expansions to flesh out the world or address player feedback. Nope. EA decided Wild Hearts hadn't hit their absurdly inflated sales targets and, in classic EA fashion, just pulled the plug. Why bother nurturing a new IP when you can squeeze more blood from the already dry stones of your sports franchise or churn out another soulless Battlefield title? This swift and brutal abandonment of Wild Hearts perfectly encapsulates the larger, depressingly familiar narrative in the gaming industry, particularly when soulless corporate behemoths like EA are involved. It highlights the utter lack of commitment to new and potentially innovative IPs, especially when they dare to challenge the established kings of a genre. For the players who did find something to love in Wild Hearts, who saw the glimmer of potential beneath the technical wreckage, it's yet another soul-crushing reminder of what could have been. Another game with genuine ideas left to rot on the vine because EA couldn't be bothered to invest in it long term or, fix the damn performance issues. Wild Hearts serves as a bitter testament to the industry's obsession with immediate massive profits, often at the expense of genuine creativity and, crucially, the players who dare to hope for something new and exciting. Thanks, EA. Let's be real here. Game abandonment isn't just some grim reality reserved for the corporate boardrooms of EA and their ilk. It happens in the indie trenches too, often with even more devastating consequences because, well, there's less of a safety net when you're already scraping by. Case in point, towns. Launched in November 2012 on Steam by the tiny SMP Studios, the brainchild of a single developer, Zavi Canal, if I'm pronouncing that right. If I butcher it, I'm sorry. This wasn't some small scope, limited mobile game either. Towns was ambitious, ferociously so. Canal envisioned a glorious genre-bending chimera, a game that would gorgeously smash together city-building grandeur a la SimCity, the dark dungeon management of Dungeon Keeper, the intricate depth of Dwarf Fortress, and the loot-driven dopamine hits of Diablo. The promise was intoxicating. Build your dream town, defend it from hordes, and plumb the depths of sprawling dungeons beneath, all in one open-ended, sprawling experience. But ambition, as they say, often outstrips reality, especially in the unforgiving world of indie development. Towns stumbled out of the gate, released into the wild in a state that could charitably be described as embryonic. Key features, the very things players were salivating over from the marketing promises, were either MIA or so half-baked they were practically raw. Remember, this was back in the digital dark ages, before Steam Early Access had become the widely understood and sometimes abused system it is today. There was no "this is a work in progress" banner waving frantically above the store page. Players bought Towns expecting a game, not a glorified alpha demo with a price tag. Predictably, the reaction from the community was less than celebratory. It was in fact a full-blown digital firestorm. The backlash was immediate, intense, and brutally honest. Players feeling misled and underserved unleashed a torrent of frustrations. Bugs crawled out of every corner of the code, promised features remained tantalizingly out of reach, and the whole thing just felt unfinished. Steam reviews became a graveyard of negativity, littered with complaints about placeholder tutorials, gaping holes where gameplay mechanics should have been, and the overwhelming sense that Towns was less a released game and more a very, very early build accidentally, or perhaps prematurely due to financial pressures, unleashed upon paying customers. Ironically, despite this disastrous launch, Towns initially sold. Over 200,000 copies flew off the digital shelves, generating a significant and no doubt desperately needed cash injection for SMP Studios. But word of mouth in the hyper-connected gaming world spreads like digital wildfire, and negative reviews tanked sales faster than a goblin pushed down a Dwarf Fortress pit. By February 2014, the weight of the project, compounded by the avalanche of negative feedback, became too much for lead developer Zavi Canal. Burnout, plain and simple, he announced his departure, leaving behind the fractured remains of Towns. The torch, or perhaps the poison chalice, was passed down to another developer, Florin Frankenberger. But even Frankenberger couldn't salvage the situation. By May 2014, he too threw in the towel, admitting the cold, hard truth. The dwindling trickle of revenue from Towns sales simply wasn't enough to justify, let alone fund, further development on a project so deeply mired in technical and design debt. And that was the end of the line. No heroic sequel, no resurrected Towns 2.0, just silence. The Towns saga morphed into a chilling cautionary tale whispered in indie development circles, a stark reminder of the treacherous tightrope walk between creative ambition and the brutal realities of game development. It's a story about the dangers of releasing too soon, the vital incompetence of managing player expectations, especially before early access was a common concept, and the devastating consequences of an unsustainable development model, particularly for solo devs and tiny teams. Towns became shorthand for indie game development gone wrong. Even today, years later, you'll still stumble across threads on Reddit and social media platforms where Towns is dragged out as a prime example of the pitfalls, the broken dreams, and the sheer vulnerability inherent in the indie game landscape. It serves as a constant, if somewhat morbid, reminder that in the world of indie games, Even the most imaginative visions can crumble under the weight of their own ambition and the unforgiving glare of player expectation. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and if you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and don't forget to click on that bell notification so that way you'll be notified when my next video goes up. Anyways, this has been PC signing out, and I'll see you all in the next video.